We've been running our own studios for 9 years. So we've been working with all kinds of publishers. And in the past few years, what we have seen is that a lot of people are calling themselves publishers, and they're not really publishers. And besides pissing us off, it's really creating a very complicated market. And there's a lot of new generations of game developers who are absolutely creative. They're great people, and they're getting screwed over all the time because they don't really know what a publisher is. Ivo was talking about games in the 90s and what publishers used to do, and those are really rare today, you know? And so that was the genesis of this talk. Talk about, you know, the different things, the different ways that you can make a deal in order to get your game out there. And this is also very important. We started writing all these slides, and what we realized is that we will not have the exact answer for you. So what we're going to do is we ask Casual Connect to have a full hour, so we can go through these slides as soon as possible and then do open mic. And then we're going to give you our opinion. We're going to let you ask us questions based on your own reality, on where you are at, and we'll give you our opinion based on 15 years of game development. You know, it's not legal advice, but it's an opinion based from people who have been doing and signing contracts for a really long time. So, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, sure. You take it.
No.
All right, I'm going to
Oh, yeah.
We'll swap off. It'll be like that. Cool. So when we talked about this, you know, Juan and I kind of had a disagreement, and his argument is there are publishers and there are people that call themselves publishers, and we should differentiate between the two and what a publishing deal is and what a publishing deal isn't. And I feel a little bit differently about it. I feel that there are deals, and whether or not that is a publishing deal is based on the different levers that you pull, and that there's not a black and a white of, you know, there's this kind of deal and that kind of deal. Every deal is going to have a number of different terms in it, and it will be more like what we knew in the past as a publishing deal, right, if certain levers are pulled, and it will be much more like a distribution deal that we're seeing now, or any sort of hybrid deal, depending on other levers that you pull. And so we wanted to talk about those different levers, but every single deal that you sign with every single publisher or distributor or aggregator or whatever you want to call them is going to have similar levers, and they're going to be set to different positions. And knowing what those positions are, and knowing when they set it to this position, your response should be, oh, well, that lever should go up here then, that's very powerful. One of the reasons we decided to have this talk is we feel like a lot of young developers don't even know that these levers exist, and that they're being offered a deal and they say, oh, well, that must be what a deal is. And we're trying to tell people, you know what, there are options. These options are known by the publishers. They're not telling you about them because it's in their best interest not to. And we'd like you to know about them, because as we, as developers, are better informed, we can go and get better deals. And when you guys get better deals, we get better deals. When you guys get crappy deals, we get crappy deals because we go to the same publishers and they say, hey, we've got 10 other developers lined up willing to sign this really crappy deal. And we'll say, well, not us. And they'll say, fine, screw you. We'll sign one of these other developers.
The problem of that is that you guys are not going to be around in 2 years. So that's the biggest problem. The problem is we've been around for 15. We know more or less what you need in order to survive. And it's understandable some of you who are with your first game are trying to get in the industry and accepting certain terms that, you know, it's great to get your game out, but we don't want you to become burnout. Ivo was in Ivo's slide, he was saying, indie games look like games in the 90s. You know, there's a lot of creativity going on and there's a lot of games coming in. But if we don't make those games to be, the good games in the indie showcase, to be commercially successful, you guys are going to be doing something else in 5 years. So we need, as an industry, we need to protect the creative people.
All right, so just the very basics. There's a bunch of different kinds of deals. If you don't know the differences between these kind of deals, you will get screwed over. And the third one is, it's all about the money, right? And I know that we want to be all creative and, ooh, it's all about the games. Yeah, that's cool, but you need money to do this. And when you're signing deals, you need to put that creative part of you away, that, oh my God, I need to sign this deal because I really want my game to see the light of day. You need to put that side in a little box and you need to talk about, is this going to get me the money that I need to do? Is this going to allow me to be a viable studio in the long term? So let me just walk through what people are calling publishers real quick, right? So there are ad networks, and we're going to talk about those, and they like to call themselves publishers. There are game aggregators. These are people, I would say Big Fish is a very good example. The Big Fish main website, a game a day, right? And they're putting up a lot of games, and they're going out and they're finding a lot of games, and they're signing deals, and they're saying, oh, we published these games, right? We would argue those are game aggregators. There are what we would refer to as real publishers, people who actually invest in the risk of making a game. People who are putting money in at the beginning, and people who are there for the run of the game. And then there are, lately, a lot of indie developers, people who are building their own game, they're taking it to Apple, or they're taking it to the Google Play Store on their own. And at that point, they are a publisher. And that publisher may only be one guy, but if he's doing that work, he's actually doing the publishing. I'm going to let Juan talk about ads, because he knows more about this than me.
Sure. Here you go.
Just second to my.
So, if you walk the floor of Casual Clinic, especially the gold sponsors area, you will find a lot of people who are telling you that they can bring you a bundle of users, right? We call them ad networks. They might call themselves something else. But basically, the pitch is we can bring you a lot of users, and we will, and you will pay us for an install, right?
Or a click.
Or a click. No, well, click is, yeah. And that's one of the biggest scams on earth, really, pretty much. It's like there's the reason why those companies exist is because there's venture capital that is spending money on it. But the reality is that the quality of that user that you're getting through an install is so variable that the value of that install that you're paying is almost nothing. And you're taking a huge risk by paying for these installs. And again, there's different kinds of people, and there might be good people out there, and in fact there are. I know some of them. But it's a model where the person from the ad network who's bringing you the user has nothing, absolutely nothing to lose, and that's a bad partner. So it's really important that we know what they're here for. They're here to sell you services. They're not here to partner with you. Even though they use the word partner, they're not here to partner with you. They're here to sell you a service, which is, I will bring you a user. And I don't know how familiar you guys are about this, but there is millions of kids in China, for example, who are paid to download games. So basically, these ad networks, for example, have kids in China who are paid to download games. They're paid 5 cents to download a game, and they download games all day into their phones. And they charge you $1.50. That's the business. Those kids don't do anything with those games. And you just spend money in marketing that it's worth nothing. So I personally strongly disagree with the concept of the ad network. I think that somebody who doesn't work on a rev share basis with you, and that's what the game aggregator is, it's not worth it, period. And I don't like to work with them unless they can truly demonstrate that that install is a quality user.
So
and yes, go.
Now let me add a bit of that's yours. That was pretty strong, and I would say I agree with about 95% of it. But there are people out there who are selling users, who are valid companies that you can do business with, that can sell you valid users. I would suggest that when you're talking about these people, these things that he's bringing up are the kind of questions that you need to be asking, right? Where am I getting my users? Can I find out exactly where I'm getting these users? Can you give me data on where I got this user from? Can you tell me about who these users are, right? And there are people out who are making good money. They've done their math. They figured out, look, this is our long-term value for a user is $5, and this guy's going to sell me users for $2. So I'm going to go buy a bunch. There are people who are doing that, and they're making money doing that. But those people are being very careful about how they are doing that. And they're going to those networks and they're saying, show me exactly where those users are coming from. They're doing a test with a small amount of money.
That's all the quality that we were talking about. Absolutely.
And they're saying, all right, well, we put $5,000 down and bought $5,000 worth of users, and that $5,000 worth of users brought us $20,000 worth of business. All right, well, now you've got a valid enterprise, right? But you need to be very careful about how you're doing that. You need to be very careful about who those partners are. You know, I was just talking to somebody who I'll leave unnamed about this exact topic, and I was saying, well, who are the good partners? And they were like, there are 100. I don't even know where to start, right? There's a lot of variety here. There's a lot of people who are getting in from VC funding, who are trying to cash in on a business where they're selling both ends of a product, right? Because the other side of this product is they're selling that to the advertisers as well. So I mean, they're getting it from coming and going. They're getting money, and you know, the argument is, you at this point are the product, right? So are you wanting to get bought and sold like that at the right price? Maybe, but you need to be very careful about that. But in our discussion about who is a publisher, I'm very leery about referring to any sort of ad network deal as a publishing deal. In this case, I would say the person who is buying those, because that's what you're really doing. You're buying a service.
Users.
Yeah,
right.
you're buying those users. You're the publisher at this point, not them, right? You're the guy that's out there putting money down, marketing money to go buy a user.
But let me stop you right there, because you said you use a very important term, and I don't know how many people understand that term. Who here understands what LTV is?
Long-term value. So one of the big things you should know, especially in free-to-play games, is if I get a user into my game, what's he worth to me, right? And no user's going to play your game forever. They're going to play your game for a certain amount of time, and they're going to leave.
Right.
And we can do the math, and we can figure out, on average, the average user who plays my game will come in and play for a certain amount of time and drop X amount of money.
Yeah, and calculating LTV is a session in itself.
Yes.
So we can talk about that later after the session, because it really is very complicated. It's basically a collection of different elements. One is how many days on average your user will stay, and what's your DARPU. That would be the simple answer to it. And how many people know what DARPU is?
Daily average
Oh my God,
revenue, average revenue
we're
per
in
user.
trouble. You guys, okay. All right, yeah, no, it's good feedback. We know what sessions we need to work on in the next Casual Connects. Daily average revenue per user is basically how much money you made divided by the number of users that you had in your game the day before. And that's your DARPU. And then you multiply that by the number of days that they stay on average playing your game, and that's your LTV. If your lifetime value is less than what you pay to acquire a user, then you're in trouble. You're going to be bankrupt soon.
You're paying money to make a game, right? If you know a guy's worth $2 for the life of your game, and you're paying $2.50 to buy a user in, you're paying people 50 cents a user to play your game. That's not really a viable business. But this is extraordinarily simplified, because what is a user, right? And this gets back to, you should be able to talk to the ad networks about where your users are coming from, right? I'll give you a very specific example. We had a series of children's stories that we made, right? And we put it in a game distribution network that was full of old ladies, right? And the answer was, oh, well, your game's not very good. Well, no, a bunch of old ladies don't want to read children's stories, right? So what is a user? Did the right user come to the product? And when you're talking about these ad networks, there are ad networks who can give you that data and say, we're going to get this exact user at this exact age who's interested in these exact things. But you know another way that you can do that? You can go to Google and buy search terms. And you get a...
That's very expensive. That's so freaking expensive.
But
$5.
So are ad networks, right? And so,
Right.
so I mean, Google
Yeah.
is an ad network,
Yeah.
right?
No,
It's
no,
just
no.
a very big one.
I just didn't want to put on the record that we recommend them because it's
No, I don't recommend it, but I'm
Right.
saying, you know, when you're talking about going to an ad network and buying those users, what you're talking about is a simplified version of going to Google
Right.
and putting together a huge search
Sure.
criteria and trying to find those users yourself. And in either case, that's worth a lot of, that's going to cost a lot of money. If you've got a huge LTV for your game, if you know your user's worth $10 a user, well, then you can sit down and do the simple math and say, well, if I can buy them for $2 and I can monetize them for $10, well, that's $8 a user. That's a viable business. And there are people out there right now doing that business. So we're not saying ad networks are useless or can't be used, but they have to be used within an understanding of what are you paying in and what are you getting in. I think we're taking too long with this. So should we move
Yeah,
on?
let's move on. Okay, so now let's talk about the game aggregator. So, you want to
I'll
start?
take this one. We'll swap.
All right.
All right, so game aggregators. Again, if you know anything about My Business Booms app, we spent maybe the last 6 years working very closely with Big Fish. I know Big Fish extremely well, but we didn't actually, and this is important to understand about people who are publishers or aggregators or whatever. They can have different roles, right? For most people that Big Fish dealt with, and we weren't one of them, someone's going to come to them and say, I've got this brand new game, and I'd like to put it on your service, and they'll say, okay, great, here's the royalty split, we're not going to give you any money up front, and we're going to put your game on our service, right? And they're going to put a lot of games on their service. Yahoo does this, Reel does this, there are a number of companies that do this exact form of business. And in one sense, they're very good. They're very simple to do business with. The contract terms are usually quite straightforward. They're not going to ask for exclusivity or things like that because, you know, they got 100 games. They're just going to put their stuff on your site and you'll go make some money, right? And what's nice about them is they have a whole lot of users, right? And they know their space well. You're going to bring them a game and they're going to say yes or no to it because they know what user they have, right? Going back to Big Fish as an example, and I only use that as an example because I know them very well, their user is very old and female, right? Most of their users are like 65-year-old women, right? So if you're coming with a game that's designed for a 12-year-old dude, they may tell you no. Not because your game sucks, but because it's just not going to monetize on their site because they don't have that user, right? But there are other sites where a 12-year-old dude will monetize very well, and you should be looking for those kind of aggregators. And they know their space. Nobody knows their group of users better than them, right? Problem is, only when your numbers are good will they care, right? They haven't put any skin into this game. They haven't invested anything in your product, right? So for them, there's no risk at all to saying, yeah, we'll put it up on the site, and if it does great, then we'll give it some marketing, and we'll put it in our newsletter, and and usually these things have some sort of ranking. So again, I'm only talking about Big Fish because I know them very well. There's a top 10 service on Big Fish, which is based off of the revenues, right? So if your game did very well, you'll move up the charts to #1. And when you're at #1, guess what? You're going to sell a lot of games because that's the one that's going to be in their marketing letters, that's the one that's going to show up in their advertising, and that's the one that shows up at the top of the page when you go to their site, right? Well, if your game didn't do very well, then it doesn't go on the top 10, which means it doesn't get the marketing, which means it does, and so there's a cycle of success and a cycle of failure. When your numbers are good, they're going to support you very highly because there's an interest in it for them. They're making money, right? If your game doesn't do very well, what do they care? They didn't invest any money into it. They're happy to let it die because they got another 20 games coming in next month, right? The other sort of problem with them is you're really dependent on them for promotion, right? You can go to any one of these aggregator networks and say, you know, please, 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 I bought you a bottle of whiskey. Can you please put me on the top of your site? They're going to decide what they're going to promote, how they're going to promote it, and when they're going to promote it. And it doesn't matter how nice you are or how well you know them. It's going to be based on data, and it's going to be based on how they make the most money. And you just have to understand that, right? And in many of these cases, you're going to have to wait for them to promote. And it can be very nerve-wracking to build your own game, put it on their site, and say, why aren't they talking about it? Where is my game? Well, that's what they're doing, and if they're not interested in doing it, they're not going to do it. Also, they're not free, right? They do this for money, and they take a big hunk of your royalties to do it, right? And they can do this because they have a captive audience, right? You go to one of these aggregators, let's say Yahoo for now, because I want to use somebody other Big Fish, but they have a certain set of users. And if you want to sell to that set of users, you have to give Yahoo your game. And now Yahoo can dictate the terms. They can say, hey, we want this huge percentage. And you can say, that's not right. That's not fair that they asked that much money. Well, tough shit to you. If you don't like the deal, they got 30 other people lined up, and it's just an aggregator. That's the deal, right? It's very difficult to negotiate them on their royalty rates.
And now let me pitch in on this one because
Go ahead.
I feel really strong against ad networks. You feel really strong against game aggregators.
I don't feel strongly against them. I'm just that's.
No, but we wanted to give you two different perspectives. We're really close mostly on what we think, but we also have preferences on one thing or another.
Go on.
So I prefer game aggregators over ad networks any time of the day because in my view, and again, game aggregators as long as it's non-exclusive. I'm going to be talking about non-exclusivity in the next slides, and that's a very important point. So I like to work with game aggregators as long as it's non-exclusive because I work with each of them, and if my numbers are good, they will promote, and I can create a relationship, and they are here for the long term because a game aggregator will take a percentage of the revenue share. It depends how good negotiator you are. Anyway, it will be significant, but because of the fact that they get lifetime revenue from that user, they will continue promoting if your numbers are good.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, your lifetime value for that user will be higher than somebody that you just paid them $1.50. So
Yes,
that is my view. That is my
And
view. Again,
That does not disagree with me at all. That's totally correct.
okay. So that's why I prefer game aggregators when I'm working on a non-exclusive basis than an ad network.
And I would say one last thing about aggregators. They're a closed garden, right? So going back to Yahoo, if you want to sell to that Yahoo user, well, you got to go to Yahoo and talk to them about it. But on the other side of that, if it's a non-exclusive deal, right? Why wouldn't you? Here's a bunch of people that you're not going to be able to sell to anyway,
Right.
and they're going to take a huge percentage of your royalties, but they're going to sell something, and you're going to get some money out of that, and some money is better than the none money that you were going to get for not doing business with them. So in that sense, you know, putting together a list of game aggregators that you're going to work with, signing non-exclusive deals with those game aggregators, and getting that money that you wouldn't have gotten anyway, makes a certain amount of sense, right? You would agree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
But the last bit of this is, and this has been very important for our business, you don't get to own the users. Those are their users, right? If you go to a game aggregator and you pick anyone, doesn't matter, and you say, you know, I want the emails of all the people that bought my game, they will tell you to go take a flying leap, right? Those emails are their emails. Those users are their users, right? And they're very clear about you can't market directly to our users. You can't put anything in our game that tells us their email addresses. You can't go put your hand on that guy, right? Now, I'm not complaining, but I will say for a fact, we have one of the most successful hidden object game franchises in the world, the Awakening series. It's probably in the top 5, right? I don't have a single email address from a single one of those users. All of those email addresses belong to Big Fish. And I don't resent that because they paid for it and that's their right.
You got a publishing deal, which is what
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that because I had a different kind of deal with them that I'm perfectly happy with. But be realistic. If you're looking at building your studio as a business and you've got a niche project where you think, you know, I'm making strategy games and I'm going to build this one strategy game and I'm going to build another one and I'm going to take the users from the first one and put them on the second one, you don't have those email addresses. Those users belong to that game aggregator. And that's something to think about very clearly because you're not going to be able to get that from them. I don't care how good a negotiator you are, they're not going to give you their email list. That's not going to happen. All right.
There you go.
I'll take this one.
Yeah.
All right.
Go for it.
So real publishers. So this gets back to back when I started in the industry. The first game I ever made was a Doom clone. It came out a few months after Doom, so that dates me for those of you who remember Doom 1. These are people that actually invest in your game, right? What I would call a publisher, and the old traditional deal, back in the day, for those of you who were in the lecture before this, I think they talked about it. Back in the day, somebody would come to you and they would say, I'm going to pay your development costs, right, as a prepaid royalty, same as they do for a book deal or a music deal when Mariah Carey makes a new CD. Again, I date myself. They're going to give you the money for making that creative content. They are then going to go out and take that creative content to the various distribution channels. Back in the day, that was Walmart and Kmart and a couple other stores, and they're going to buy the shelf space for that. Then they're going to earn royalties. Back in the day, it was somewhere between 30 and 40% of the royalties were yours, and you would have to earn back out your development fees at 30 to 40%, and then you were going to get your royalties on the other side. That's the way the industry was in the mid-90s when I started making games.
And the early 2000s.
Yeah, and it went on for a while. And back then, it was a very simple industry because the channels were also quite straightforward, right? You had a couple consoles, right? And, well, you dealt with them. You had a couple big box retail stores. You dealt with them. There was no digital distribution back then. And so it was quite straightforward. And it was not really a bad deal because the risk to you as a developer was really quite low. You weren't putting your money into development. They were putting the money into development, right? Now, you had opportunity costs because you weren't building something else instead of building this thing that you're building. But let's be honest, the real risk in this relationship was being taken by the publisher. They were the ones that were putting cash down, right? And in return for that, they were going to own that IP or they were going to get first rights on that IP. They were going to somehow lock that IP together because, you know what, if we made Spyro the Dragon, then, you know, if we paid for the making of Spyro the Dragon, when we want to make Spyro the Dragon 2, it's going to be ours. That's the way it used to be, right? Quite straightforward. These kind of deals, believe it or not, still exist. And I know a lot of people say, oh, you can't get a deal like that ever again. I signed one last week, right? These deals actually do exist, and you can go get them. but they're difficult. There are levers that you have to pull, and there are things that you have to prove as a developer to be able
And
to do
it's
that.
chicken and an egg situation, which is exactly that, is you will have to have at least one good game out before you actually can get a publishing deal, or have a proven track record that you work at a company. So by all means, we don't recommend you to start with this path right away, because some of you might not have that. So, but we want to explain what what real publishing is.
Yeah, and like I say, I don't agree with Juan that there's publishing and not publishing, but this is
Right.
as close to what I would call real publishing. And the part of it that I call publishing is the same thing that you see in the book industry, the same thing you see in the music industry, any form of entertainment is they are putting risk in at the beginning of the game, right? And so what's the good part? Well, you get money, right? Money's good, right? But what I would say is more important than getting the money is they now have a vested interest in your product, right? If they threw
You need
down
to make that money back.
yeah. Someone somewhere signed up for this thing and said, we're going to give Chris X amount of money to make this game. And when we've made it, they can't just put it up on their site and be like, oh, it didn't monetize very well, to hell with it. No, they're going to figure out a way to make money on it. They're going to take it out to other distributors. They're going to market it. They're going to put budget behind it because they have some skin in the game. And I would say that part of this relationship is still very important. And when you're going out and talking to, whether it's an aggregator, whether it's a distributor, whoever it is, whatever they all call themselves publishers, but whatever the heck they are, the idea that there is some risk to them in failure, I think is critically important to your success, because that's what makes them a partner and not somebody who's selling you a service. Now, with this comes opinions, and you'll note we said opinions. Now, I will, in all fairness, most publishers have been working in the game industry a long time, as have the aggregators, and they know their audience, and they know their market, and they know their products, and they probably have some pretty good ideas about what things can be made. And I think there is value to working with a publisher who knows what the heck they're doing, who can look at your product and say, this isn't going to work with our audience, or this, we've done games like this, and it didn't work, right? I wish that were 100% of the time. But I would say it is more than 50% of the time that their input is useful. But a significant non-zero percentage of the time, their input is either negative or useless. It's
Or
a wash.
different, right? It will change your priorities in your development, because Ivo was talking about this, and I asked that question when Ivo was talking about this. If you are in a publishing relationship, you have a couple of clients, or a couple. I always call them clients, because, or different different types of audiences. Mm-hmm. Your audience number one is the producer or your publisher. You have to make that guy happy. You have to make that a person having fun playing your game. The second type of client is the distributor. So you have to make that person also happy. And the third part of your audience is the real player. So there's a lot of things you learn when you start working with publishers, and I strongly recommend that you actually work at a company that already works with publishers in order to learn that relationship. Otherwise, it could be a big failure. But yeah, it's very tricky. It has the benefits that Chris was mentioning, but it's a different way of developing games.
I would also say that the last point in here is also critical, which is they're not going to give you that money for free. They're going to want something for it, right? And absolutely the first thing they're going to want is the intellectual property, right? I paid to develop that, it's mine, damn it. And you know what? That's a pretty fair argument. It's very difficult for me to stand up to a publisher and say, I know you paid for the full development and you're going to pay the marketing costs, but damn it, I made it and it's mine. Quite honestly, it's a very selfish argument. I know I would love to be that, but you're not going to win that argument very often, and I don't know that you should even have it. But it's not just that they're going to want the IP. They're going to want other things, right? They're going to say, hey, we're going to put a bunch of money and time into you making the best Clash of Clans game that there ever was. You know what? We'd really prefer that you don't make any more games that look like Clash of Clans, and we're going to try to put that in the contract. And again, as much as I'd like to say, foul, bad publisher, come on, it's kind of fair, right? They're going to put a lot of time and money into helping you build this engine and help you build all this stuff, and the next thing you're going to do is turn around and build something that looks just like it with a different title and say, fuck you, publisher. They have to protect themselves against that. They're a business as well, and they have to, So these are things that you're going to have to think about when you start working with publishers.
That was pretty good. It was 30 minutes without you saying fuck you.
I tried. I tried really hard. I failed. I'm not gonna. I'm
All
gonna
right, let's
try.
move on.
I'm
Let's
gonna
move
try.
because
All
we're
right.
talking about that in the next
All right.
slide.
You want to do this? You want me to do this?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
I'll
go.
do it. Here. Thank you. All right. So the main aspects of a publishing relationship that are very important is who owns the IP. In most cases, majority of cases, would you agree, it's the publisher.
It's whoever paid for it.
Whoever paid for it. Yeah, exactly. Who gets what money and when you get paid, and this is a very important thing that we're going to talk in the next slides, which is milestones. What's how they actually pay you. What you usually hear is recoupable development fees, which is they will give you an advance on royalties. That's the big majority.
Let me just ask a quick question,
But-
because I'm always surprised how many people don't understand this part. Honestly, who here fully understands what he says when he says an advance on royalties?
Okay,
I'm going
thank
to
you.
walk you through this because I want to make sure everybody
a good
fully
point.
understands, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you sign a deal, and they're going to give you $100,000 to develop a game. It's using a nice big round number. And they're going to take, and your royalties are going to be 50%. You did a great deal, you're going to get 50%, right? So now you go out and start selling games, and you make $100,000. Wow, I've gotten through my recoups. Oh, no, no, no,
Nope.
no. You are earning at 50%. So every time they sell a game, they're going to take 50% of their sales, set it aside, and say, aha, this money is your money. But we already gave you $100,000 of it. So when your 50% of the net sales, and we're going to talk about net in a minute,
Yeah.
when your 50% of the net sales equal $100,000, then you start earning more money, right? And that's what they call a recoupable royalty, right? Or a prepaid royalty, meaning you're going to earn royalties, and we've given you some of those royalties up front, but until you earn those out, we're not going to give you any more money. And just for the avoidance of any misunderstanding, let's say the game only makes $30,000. They can't come back to you and say, hey, the game only made $30,000, give us our money back. No, 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 no. It doesn't work like that. Recoupable royalties, once the money's in your pocket, it's your money. But they're not going to give you any more money until you've paid those recoupable royalties out, right? So that's, if you don't understand that, you shouldn't be talking about contracts. That's a critical thing. Now, there's another way they can give you money up front, which is called a dev fee, right? And a dev fee is, we're just going to give you some cash, right? And you never have to pay that money back. So, same deal. We give you $100,000 to make a game, you make 50%, you sell one copy of the game for $10, you get your $5 from Unit 1, right? Getting a dev fee is, people will say, oh, you can't do it. I actually have made most of my money in BoomZap as dev fees, right? But you're going to get a really shitty royalty on the back end, right? Because the game theory here is, I'm saying, I'm going to take very little money up front. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a lot of money up front. I'm going to take this dev fee, and I'm never going to pay it back to you. But on the back end, you're going to get to keep the lion's share of the royalties. And so, again, getting back to my exercise in levers, right? Lever 1, hey, you get dev fees instead of recoupable royalties. Yay, you. Lever number 2, your royalties just went way the hell down, right? And that argument is always going to happen. You can go try to get dev fees. It's a very difficult thing to get, but there are people who are giving them. I'm earning them. It can be done, right? What was the other one?
And it takes us to a very interesting point, which is the next point, which is who does the marketing. And in 99.9% of cases, the publisher will do the marketing, of course. And that is always discounted from the royalty. So,
Let me step back one step further.
okay,
All right.
because that's very important.
Who here knows what net royalties are? All right, I'm happy that none of you raised your hand because there is no definition of net royalties, right? You can look at, there is no official definition of net royalties. If it says in your contract, you will earn 10% of net, that is meaningless. Somewhere else in your contract has to be what is net royalties, right? And net royalties are going to be gross money received by the distributor, aggregator, publisher, whatever the hell they are, right? Let's call them big company. Right, so big company receives $100,000. That's their gross. Their net is that gross minus whatever the hell they're taking out of it, right? And they're going to define what the hell they're going to take out of it.
Let's put it in an example.
Yeah.
So, if let's say the gross is $10, the platform will take 3 of those, right? Apple, Google Play, and Facebook will take 3 of those. So just for this example. So you got 7 left. Of those 7, let's say that 2 were used for marketing. You get 5. And if your definition of net was minus a platform and marketing cost, then your net is 5. And if you get 50% of that, then that means you get 2.5. That goes 2.5 over the 100,000 that you got. So that means that you don't have to sell, you don't have to make 100,000. You have to make 400,000.
Right, if you're paying back your recoupable royalties.
Exactly.
And
So that's a very important thing that you need to do in your
every
mind.
single contract will have different things about what's in the net.
Right.
And disreputable publishers will put everything but the kitchen sink in there. You can be sure they're going to put all the taxes in there. You can be sure that if there's a retail product, they're going to put some kind of buyback in there, that if the retail product doesn't sell, that they have to, pay to get the projects back. You can be sure that they're going to try to put their marketing expenses in there. You can be damn sure that they're, and in Juan's example, the gross doesn't even start until Apple took its cut. Because
Right, 7.
gross
We
is
start with 7.
usually defined as what the actual publisher, what big company X received.
Right.
And they didn't receive $10. They received 7
7.
because 3 went to Apple, right?
Right.
I've heard more young developers more unhappy about this one bit of their contract than anything else, because they make this game and it makes a whole shit ton of money, and they say, where's my money?
And this applies to the other publishers too. Exactly.
Distribution
This exactly
deals,
applies.
deals with aggregators,
Right.
whoever you deal with, there's always going to be a list of terms at the front of the contract. One of those terms needs to be net, needs to be very clear what it is, and you can go negotiate what that is.
And if you have a question, just send them. What I do is I send them an email and say, "Oh, so you mean this?" And I do this exact calculation that I did. So basically, if we make 10, this is what I'm going to be making, and have them in writing. Yes, that's exactly what you're going to be making.
Yeah.
And that solves the situation. Let's move on, because we got a couple of things that we need to talk about. It's especially of must-have clauses in a publishing deal. And we were talking about this morning. And the first one, and this is super important, the publisher will own the IP, but you own the technology that you build the IP with. Why this is a very important thing? It's because you want to make sure that you're not liable in your next project for the technology that you're using. You're making tools all the time, and your publisher benefits from that tool, from those tools. Because if, let's say, you have a universal level editor, which is almost impossible to make, but let's, for the sake of the argument, you have this level editor, and you built this level editor in a previous project. When you're making this new game for Publisher X is saving 3 weeks of development of one programmer because you're bringing the level editor. However, if publisher owns the technology, that means that you cannot take that level editor and all the improvements into the next project. So basically, you will make the next publisher liable for not owning the technology.
Let me add one other thing. I know a couple people in this room right now are thinking, but I use Unity. I can't own Unity. No. When you built your game with Unity, I promise you built some plugins, you built some tools, you built some technology that worked with Unity. You still need to have that part of your agreement very clear. Sure, I used Unity, but I built a lot of stuff on top of Unity to make this game. What the publisher is really should be buying is the actual assets that go in your game, and the actual game code and game logic that goes into that specific game. Anything beyond that should be referred to as tools. That belongs to you, because the next thing, if you have a falling out with this publisher and you go work with another publisher, the first thing your first publisher is going to do is come down on you and be like, you can't use any of that crap. You need to have a contract that says, no, that crap is my crap. I get to use that.
Mm-hmm. Can you take the second one? You have first rights on SQL derivatives? Because you know this one.
Yeah. So let's say you make let's call it Game X, right? And Game X just goes through the roof, right? So first rights means someone has to be approached and talked to and given a fair deal and given a chance to make a fair offer on the sequel, the derivative, the other game that comes with it. And this goes both ways, right? A publisher will want this too, right? Especially if they're putting a bunch of marketing money into it. So if you made Game X, even if you own the IP and you put together some exclusive distribution deal that came with some sort of money up front or some sort of marketing guarantee, they're going to come back to you and say, hey, when you want to make Game Y, which is based on Game X, We want to be the publisher of that. And that's a fair argument from the publisher if they put some skin in the game, right? If they put something in it. If they're just some aggregator somewhere that just threw your game up on their aggregation network, no, you don't get first rights to that. You didn't put any skin in the game. But when they put skin in the game, they're probably going to want to know that when you want to capitalize on the success of your project, that they can be part of that success. I would argue that's a fair argument if they invested in your success, right? But it works the other way too, right? So if you do even a work for hire deal, right? You got a dev fee, you get no royalties on the back end, the IP belongs 100% to the publisher, and you make Clash of Clans, right? You ought to have it in your contract that when it's time to make Clash of Clans 2, that's me, and you're going to give me a fair deal on that, right? Because you invested in that as well. And I think that's a very fair argument, and it goes both ways. The next point, this gets into something that I always tell people: if you don't have the money to hire a lawyer, you probably shouldn't have a company. We're not giving legal advice. Go talk to a lawyer about your legal advice. I'm giving you strategic negotiation advice. At some point with some publisher in time, you are going to reach a point where either you or the publisher doesn't want to work with the other party anymore. And there needs to be very clear language in your contract about what happens when that eventuality happens, right? And that includes every contract should have some end point, right? You don't want to sign a contract, especially for free-to-play games, because remember, when you're signing for a free-to-play game, you're going to be maintaining that free-to-play game for quite a long time, right? There's still people making content for Clash of Clans right now, right? You don't want to be tied into, I will forever until the publisher is no longer interested in it making content for this game, right? That's a very strong step for somebody to ask you to make. So there needs to be end clauses just based on time. There needs to be end clauses based on what happens when they go bankrupt, what happens when you go bankrupt, who owns the code, who owns the technology, who owns the characters, who owns the IP, right? What happens when you really want to continue this game? You've released a free-to-play game, you love it, you believe in it, you think if I just change these 5 other things, it's going to be great, but you know what? They're not interested in doing it anymore. Can you get that back, and can you do that, right? And it goes the other way too. The publisher is convinced this is a good project, and you're like, screw it, I don't want to do this anymore. What happens in that? I just worked through a contract with this, and it included a number of buyout clauses where these conditions were laid out in detail. And when these things happen, then one side had the right to buy out the other side from the project. That's one way to handle it. It's not the only way to handle it. But this is something you should be thinking very clearly about in any contract you sign. All contracts have an end. You want to know what that end looks like, right? The next one, clear milestones and payments.
Yeah.
You want to know, again, we said, what are you going to get paid and when, right? You need to have very clear milestones. You need to know what it is that you're required to deliver to somebody. You need to have that clear enough that if you ever had to go to court and bring a lawyer who doesn't know shit about games into the discussion, that you could go to a court and say, this thing was supposed to be built with this amount of whatever, and we did it, and we want our payment, and they don't have any right to say no to us. But let's be really honest. If you go to court on a milestone, everybody loses.
No,
everybody loses, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not just about going to court, it's just to have a clear understanding. And if the contract is well laid out and it says what the milestones typically are going to be, then you're better protected, and you also have a better understanding with the producer that you're working with. It's more because of the understanding of what the expectation of the publisher and the producer who works at the publisher should be, more than protecting yourself legally. So,
Yeah,
so I would just put emphasis on, look, there needs to be a clear understanding of what you're going to be doing on month 1, month 2, month 3. And this morning we were talking with Chris that I make monthly milestones in my contract. I basically adjust my project based on monthly milestones, but he doesn't. He does it differently. Your company or how you manage your company will influence in how you do your contracts.
But let me say what prompted this discussion, and something I think is very important to understand, is look at how they want to schedule your milestones. The first thing a publisher will want to do is put a big-ass balloon payment at the end, right? And they'll say, we'll pay you very little money until it's all done, and then we'll give you the real money, right? And remember, they're going to have a termination agreement in there somewhere that they can get out of this contract whenever the hell they want. So they'll get your game up to alpha. They've only paid 35% of what you thought you were going to make on this game. They play the alpha, they don't like it, and they say, all right, fuck you, get out.
Right.
Oh, you only made 35% of your money because you never made that balloon payment at the back end. Be very careful of publishers that want to put those big payments at the back.
Say no to balloon payments.
One last thing, I came in the very end of last session, and there was a question about, how do I know what they spent on marketing? How do I know what they spent on everything? You know that because you have audit rights and you put it in your contract. Every contract that you sign with anybody should have the right for you to bring an independent auditor into the situation. They should be able to look at all of the records in a reasonable time frame. That company should be required to give those records within a reasonable time frame. And if they find, and I think the usual number is 10%, if they find that your royalties or the money that you're owed is incorrect beyond 10%, then they're going to pay for the whole damn thing. They're going to pay you all the money that they owe you, they're going to pay you interest on that money, and they're going to pay for all of the auditing. Any reputable publisher, aggregator, distributor will allow that to be put in a contract. Anyone who will not allow that to be put in a contract, do not work with them, period. I give you that advice. Deal breaker clauses. I'll go this really quick because I only have like 3 more minutes.
Yeah.
I actually had a publisher come to me and say, you know, the way we usually do our deals is we buy part of your company. If somebody wants to buy part of your company for a stinking publishing deal, you can tell them to go stick their head in the sand.
Yeah.
Cross-collateralization. This is a little complex. You've got 4 projects. Each one of them has prepaid royalties. Each one of them, they paid you $100,000, right? They say to you, oh, you owe us $400,000. Game 1 did really, really well. Game 2 did very, very poorly. So we'll take royalties from game 1 and stick it against your owed monies on game 2. No, 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 no. That is not allowed. It is in your contract that each game is a separate game and is financed separately. And if you got paid $100,000 on this game and it didn't make a dime, and you got paid $100,000 on this game and it made $2 million, you pay back out your $100,000 on this one and you get your money here. This one doesn't relate to this one. Don't allow them to cross-collateralize. I can't say that word. The last one, broad exclusivity. You will sign some exclusive deals at some point if you want money from somebody. It's how it is, right? They will come to you and say, we don't want you making another Clash of Clans game. You're making one for us. Don't make it for anyone else. If they're giving you enough money, if the other levers are pulled correctly, that's actually a fair cop. All right. But when they come to you and say, for 2 years you don't make games for anybody else, no, go stick your head in the sand. Doesn't work like that, right? You don't have the right, there's no need for you to do that to me other than to use it as a punitive measure against me. You don't get that.
And this is something that it's also super important. Okay. Because now that we have gone over all these different clauses in terms of a publishing relationship, you can see how exclusive distribution, which is not publishing, exclusive distribution can be harmful. So if you go to you make your own game, you work for it on your own, with your own funds for months, and then you go and sign up with, which we cannot name names, right?
Big Studio X.
Right, or Pindingo, or something like that, yeah. Yeah, I didn't name any names.
Go on.
Okay, all right. And you give them your game. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to measure the first 2 days of performance. And you never get your game right on release 1, period. There's no freaking way. You're not a genius, and we're not geniuses, and we've been around for 15 or 20 years, and we never get the game right on release 1. And these guys have released a game every week, sometimes every day. And if you gave them exclusive rights, and they drop your game, you lost your game and all your money, because the distribution of your game is tied to them. Even if you do one platform exclusivity, it's bad. It's just, even if you say, but I have no users on iOS.
Let me add one thing.
Yes.
It is bad if they didn't pay for it.
Right, but I want to get to that. I can't even get to that.
Right.
It's like, if there's no upfront commitment from this company, they have no interest whatsoever in you. You're taking the risk. They're not taking any risks. So you're shooting yourself in the foot. You'll be out of the industry in the next 2 years because you'll be burned and frustrated that there's no money in games. I cannot survive making games. So this is a very important point, and that's why we went through all what it means to be a publisher and what kind of relationship a publisher and the developer should have. Because even with a game that you self-fund, you have to be really careful. And there's we were talking about this morning. There's no single distributor or publisher who is the best in every platform or every region, period. There's none. So you might as well work with different distributors in a non-exclusive basis across the world. And you still own your game.
As a very specific example, I cannot think of a single company that is the best company to work with in Western Europe and China. And I dare anyone to give me an example of, we are the top person in Western Europe and we are the top person in China. There is no company that is that thing. So if you are going to a company and saying, I give you exclusive worldwide distribution, you are by definition saying, I would like a second-class partner in one of these two regions, right? And that's fine. That's fine if they're willing to pay for it, right? Everything has a price, and you need to be aware of what you're giving them. You're giving them the right to be a second-class distributor in China or Western Europe for a price.
It's the levers. It's the levers concept that Chris is saying. You know, if somebody wants exclusive distribution, okay, well, give me some money. You know, look at what your costs were. You know, even if you were eating ramen every day and living in your parents' house. You know, look at how much was that in case they screw up and you can make the next game. Yeah, we gotta go. But must have clauses in a distribution deal. We should talk about this. Ensuring marketing has a lot of problems. We can talk about that separately. Basically, it's really hard to ensure that they actually give you a million installs because of what we were talking at the beginning. It's very hard to qualify. It could be a million installs of crappy users in a third world country. So it's not helping. The IP rights should always be yours. And the audit clause that Chris was mentioning was audit rights. It's very important that you can.
Any contract you sign with anyone who will pay you money for the rest of your life should include an audit clause. If you take nothing else from this lecture, please take that.
All right. So I know we're running out of time. So do we have any questions from you guys? And we'll stay around outside. At least I'll stay outside because you're emceeing.
He'll hang
Yeah.
out.
Yes, over there.
My last sentence? Any contract that you sign with anybody in the world who will have to pay you money at some point in time should include an audit clause, period. An audit clause. We talked about it earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, a really small question. You said that you have to take up the milestones in your contract. How far do you explain them, and how far do you document those milestones?
Yeah, it's a very interesting. It's really long. I mean, we can talk outside. Basically, you need to be specific in terms of what you're trying to achieve at that point, but you also need to be general at the same time in terms of saying, yes, I'm going to develop. You don't say in your milestone, I'm going to develop feature X. Because if it turns out that when you develop the core gameplay, feature X was obsolete, right? So you have to say, I'm going to make a first playable. I'm going to make one level that's going to be fun to play in X amount of time. And it requires certain experience to actually be good at predicting, based on the project that you're trying to make, when are you going to reach that.
But let's be very honest about this, right? I've been through this particular issue more times than I want to think about. There's actually a ream of evidence about this of the big fights I used to have with Ubisoft when I worked at Crytek, when we were building Far Cry. And they were based on exactly this issue, which was, what is a milestone? We said we would have X number of levels. They said those levels weren't fun. We said they were. All right, what do you do, right? So, I mean, at some point, there has to be a trust and a relationship between the publisher and the developer where you're going to look at this and try to ship a product and work with each other. And it's going to be very difficult to put that into legal writing. So, honestly, this is an art, and largely it's going to be based on you're going to have a good working relationship with your publisher.
Yes?
So, do you have experience with where the publisher wants exclusive marketing right? Because I've heard stories about other developers.
Well, of course they want exclusive marketing rights. They pony up the money.
No, sorry, where they handle the marketing exclusively. So you can do your own Facebook and can get your own fan base.
Oh, if you can put the game on your website or stuff like that?
Absolutely, there are companies that will ask for that.
Yeah.
And again, I say the same thing. Sure, for a price you can have that. But
Right.
you need
Move with the lever.
nothing in this talk should be construed as you should never do this. It should be construed as you should understand that this is something that comes with a very heavy price. And I have done deals where I have said, I won't touch marketing, I won't put this on my Facebook, I won't do anything. There's a price for that. And those have been good deals. It can be done, but you should know that there's a price for that.
I'll give you my opinion on stuff like that. I don't work with anybody who doesn't let me put a credit screen and doesn't allow me to put the game on our website unless I really need the money to work on it. But if it's a really cool project and I cannot put it on my own website, I'd rather not do it because your next project is going to be based on your previous one. So
Well, let me clarify.
If you don't,
Are you
if
talking
don't
about
release,
hosting it on your site, or are you talking about putting publicity for it on your site?
No, putting it on my website and also putting it on my Facebook page. Like, let the world know I developed that
Now,
game.
that thing, you should never give that away, right? What I was talking about is, there are some deals where they'll say, you can't host this on your own website. All right, fair enough, you can't host this on your own website.
Right.
But if they
That's
say,
supposed to
if they say you can't say that you made it, or you can't put it in your credits, screw you, dude, you can't
Do you
work
always
with me.
demand a splash screen or is credits like that?
What's that?
You said that you also demand a splash screen or something?
Yeah, I put in the contract that we should have a credit screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any
Yeah, and
any
the
reputable
credits
publisher will
go
let
in
you have
the
that.
exhibit.
Right.
Exhibit B or C goes to the credits of the game.
And then one other question,
Yeah.
because I did some traditional publishing deal in the 90s as well.
Uh-huh.
What's your stance on source code ownership? For
So the
actual
technology,
source code of the game
right?
itself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Go ahead.
I'll take this one. Giving them, if they own the IP, yeah, they get the source code for the actual game code, right? And they're probably going to want, there'll be an agreement, and again, this is getting into legalese, but there'll be something in the contract that says that they have the right to license your tools and technology, right? And on their
Perpetual
side,
license is called.
on their side as a publisher, you know, if you go bankrupt, or if you say screw off, or you do something weird, they want the right and the ability to be able to walk away and finish the game. And for that, they're going to need all the source code, and that's legitimate. But they don't get ownership of the tools and technology. They get a licensing right free of charge for the tools and technology.
The source code is the source code of the gameplay of the game.
Yeah.
The source code of the tool, it's different.
Yeah.
It's different. And you give them a perpetual license of that tool so they can maintain the game forever.
And that's fair on the part of the publisher,
Right.
quite honestly.
Thank you very much, guys.